In recent years, Vikings have exploded in popularity. From TV shows and movies to the Viking aesthetic, Viking music, and the rapid growth of Norse paganism. Before our eyes, we are watching the Vikings turning into a cornerstone of Western culture, like the Greeks and Romans. The culture of the Vikings was remarkably similar to that of the ancient Greeks, who have, in almost every Western culture which followed them, served as a wellspring of culture and a cornerstone of identity. I believe these two cultures, one in the southern tip of Europe, the other in its northernmost reaches, stand out to us so strongly because they both contained, so distinctly and vividly, all of the elements which make up the essence of the European heroic tradition. Both the Greeks and the Vikings shared a typically Indo-European hospitality culture, in which guests were to be treated well, honesty and reciprocity was expected from strangers, and a man's word was to live and die by. Both cultures shared the love of war, of glory gained in battle, the love of adventure and exploration, glee in trickery, deceit and wit, and a deep concern with fame, honor, and reputation. The Hávamál, or the Words of the High One, is an Old Norse text containing advice about proper conduct in life, composed during the Viking Age. In the Hávamál, it is written, quote, "Cattle die, kinsmen die, you yourself must also die, but fair fame never dies, for he who has won it. Cattle die, kinsmen die, we ourselves also die. But I know one thing that never dies, judgment on each of the dead." End quote. This could easily be a quote from the Iliad, and in fact, if I did not know where this quote was from, I might have even assumed that it was Homer. And here's another quote from the Hávamál. "Taciturn and prudent, and daring in war should a king's children be. Joyous and liberal everyone should be until his hour of death. A cowardly man thinks he will live forever if warfare he avoids, but old age will give him no peace, though spears may spare him." End quote. Here the Hávamál seems as if it could be speaking, across culture, geography, and time, directly to the dilemma of Achilles' fate in the Iliad. Achilles, if you return from Troy and avoid warfare, you will find no peace in your old age. Go die in battle, for only a man's reputation is immortal. Yet here we also see a key difference between Viking and Greek culture, or at least the literature which we have received from them. In the writings of the Greeks, we see an inner anguish and internal contradiction in the heroes which is less present in the characters of the Norse sagas. Achilles, though he eventually chooses death and glory over a long life, is tormented by his fate. And while this tragic element is still present in the Viking sagas, we also see an almost simple, straightforward desire for honor and glory. Unlike Achilles, the Norseman who died in battle found peace in Valhalla, a peace which consisted of eternal combat alongside the gods. I believe that in Viking culture, even more than in Greek culture, we see the ideal of the heroic death. When the Norseman died on the battlefield, the beautiful Valkyries would come to take him to Valhalla. In Homer, the Keres Thanatoio, Kyries of death, appear on the battlefield. They are clear etymological and mythological equivalents to the Valkyries, but they have no positive connotation. One can make a comparison between the Greek Elysian fields, an afterlife paradise reserved for demigods and heroes, and Valhalla. Yet in the Greek tradition, the emphasis is on the dreary and dark afterworld and the tragic fate of the hero. In contrast, when reading the poetic Edda, you get a sense of a simplicity and practicality which distinguishes the Vikings from the Greeks, a sort of practical, matter-of-fact disregard for death. I think Robert Eggers captured this spirit beautifully in his movie The Northman. But this is not to say that the Vikings were simple in any derogatory sense. They, like the Greeks, delighted in trickery and cleverness. In Thrumskvida, a giant has stolen Thor's hammer and will only return it in exchange for the hand of Freya in marriage. Instead, the gods send Thor, dressed up as Freya, to trick the giant. Once Thor grasps Mjolnir, he casts off his disguise and kills the giant and his family. When reading this episode, I could not help but be reminded of Odysseus and the tricks which he played on Polyphemus. The Vikings, like the Greeks, were a great seafaring culture. In both cultures, we can see the Indo-European love of exploration, adventure, and expansion, whether by horse, chariot, or boat. Odysseus' unwilling adventures, whether entirely invented or based upon historical events, were equaled, if not surpassed, by the Vikings. The first European to set foot on the Americas, at least in recorded history, was not Christopher Columbus in 1492, but the Viking Lief Erikson, 500 years earlier, in just 1000 AD. In the Icelandic saga of Erik the Red, we hear the story of Lief's father, named the Red either because of his hair, his temper, or perhaps both. Erik was born in Norway, but grew up in Iceland after his father was exiled from Norway for murder. And following in his father's footsteps, Erik would be exiled from Iceland for murder, and sail west, where he would discover and settle Greenland. In the saga of the Greenlanders, we hear of Erik the Red's son, Lief Erikson, who was born in Iceland, but grew up in Greenland after his father's expulsion. Lief would sail even further west than his father, making land on North America, which he would call Vinland. The sagas even describe Lief's encounters with Native Americans, which is truly mind-boggling to imagine. The discovery of Viking settlements in Newfoundland, Canada, confirmed the historical reality behind the events of these sagas, and these sagas themselves come to us from Iceland, which, perhaps counter to our assumptions about the Norse, had a rich literary culture. And I believe this is part of the reason for the recent explosion in the popularity of the Vikings. Unlike the Greeks and Romans, much of Norse culture is yet unexplored, or at least unexhausted. While Greek and Roman culture has been explored, celebrated, and elaborated upon for thousands of years, the culture of the Norse serves as fresh soil for new sprouts to grow upon. I also believe that interest in the Vikings has grown out of a broader interest in native European culture. As other peoples embrace their indigenous roots, Northern Europeans are eager to find their native culture. And this also drives the rapid growth of Norse paganism. Historically, Northern Europe was most resistant to Christianity, and even when they converted, it was often just paganism with a Christian veneer. And it seems to me, as Norse paganism returns with strength, that the North will be the first to abandon Christianity. I believe paganism will see increasing growth in Europe, especially with the pressures of Islam and mass migration. Europeans will be forced to find an exclusive cultural identity for themselves, beyond nation and geography, which Christianity does not offer. They will be forced to define their native culture and heritage, and to move away from universalist ideas, both politically in the form of liberalism and culturally in the form of Christianity. But I do not think that this means that Christianity will go extinct in Europe. My hope is that we will see a plurality of religions, which can serve as the soil for a new cultural renaissance, and can all be viewed as outgrowths of the European heroic tradition, like branches on a tree, or a river feeding different outlets. As the river moves through time, smaller rivers branch off, each representing different heroic cultures: the Greeks, the Romans, the Vikings, the various pagan traditions, the Renaissance, and medieval Christianity. And there needn't be a struggle for supremacy between these traditions. Each can exist as a branch on a tree, its roots stretching into the distant past, and its branches into the distant future, each branching culture representing a unique expression of the heroic ideal, and yet their essence, their sap, remaining the same. And on this great tree, the Norse were certainly one of the most magnificent branches.
Be honest. Are all of us riding to our deaths.
Yes, we are.
And since we're dying anyway, you're saying that it's better if we at least die fighting?
I am. Everything that you thought had meaning, every hope, dream, or moment of happiness, none of it matters as you lie bleeding out on the battlefield. We all die. But does that mean our lives are meaningless? Does that mean that there was no point in our being born? Would you say that of our slain comrades? What about their lives? Were they meaningless? They were not! Their memory serves as an example to us all! The courageous fallen, the anguished fallen! Their lives have meaning because we, the living, refuse to forget them! And as we ride to certain death, we trust our successors to do the same for us! Because my soldiers do not buckle or yield when faced with the cruelty of this world! My soldiers push forward! My soldiers scream out! My soldiers rage!
It gladdens me to know that Odin prepares for a feast. Soon I shall be drinking ale from curved horns. This hero that comes into Valhalla does not lament his death. The Aesir will welcome me. My death comes without apology. And I welcome the Valkyries to summon me home. I shall not enter Odin's hall with fear. There, I shall wait for my sons to join me. And when they do, I will bask in their tales of triumph.